Hey Gardener, Taylor here from the Community Garden Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to provide you with some housekeeping items before we get started. If you're new to the podcast, every week, every 2 weeks, the beginning of the podcast gets updated. So the information that I'm delivering to you right now is relevant and will be removed when it's no longer relevant. So if you've already heard this, if you're binge watching or binge listening, fast forward to about 5 or 6 minutes and we'll launch into the actual episode. So for today, it is currently the week of October 20th. And for folks in the Northern Hemisphere or for folks who are in similar zones, I'm in zone 6B and my first frost date is supposed to be early October. It's now October 20th and we still haven't actually had a frost, but the plants are starting to be damaged from the cold. We're getting about -3 degrees Celsius overnight right now, at least tonight. So we're pretty much done in the garden now. If you haven't had a chance, go into your garden and just remove. Actually, you could technically leave your entire garden, but if you're planning to remove anything from your garden, go ahead and snip the plants at the base. Don't actually pull them up out of the soil as long as they weren't diseased. You can go ahead and let them break down into the soil, and it also helps with better water access for next year, getting water down into the soil, and will help a little bit with soil erosion. If your plants were diseased, pull them out fully. You can also leave all your plants over winter. You do not need to take them out of your garden. Don't let anyone make you think so. So now that we're done with the season, there's likely nothing else coming out of your garden. I still have a few loofahs, some flowers still going, a couple of small things, but for the most part, the season is over, folks. So my suggestion to you over the next couple of weeks, this will probably be the last time I update this until realistically November, December. I would really love for you to make note about your gardening season. Please, please, please journal. Write down the things that you learned this year. Write down the things that you want to do differently next year. Write your observations down. Write your questions down. Write all your ideas down. Spring you will thank winter you, okay? Please. Also, as you're out in your garden mourning its loss, if you see any seeds that have matured, you can go ahead and pop them off your plants. Marigolds are a really fun way to save seeds. You'll wait for the seed heads to, become dry and crunchy, and they usually turn black. You can go ahead and pop them off. You can store them in a paper bag. There's lots of fun plants to pull seeds off of. Snapdragons, the little heads turn brown, and then they have little holes in the top, and you can flip it over and shake the seeds into your hand. Another fun one is coriander or cilantro. It's very obvious when the seeds are ready, so take a peek at the plants that are still in your garden, see if you can pull any seeds off them. Also, this is for anyone listening to this podcast. If you've ever thought about organizing a community garden, requesting a community garden in whatever area you live in, now is the time to start thinking about that if you have any sort of winter break. So right now, we're not going to be gardening now until March, April. So we do all of our prep work during the winter months. So this is when we take new garden requests. This is when we assess new sites. We discuss partnerships with different organizations. So if this is something that you have been personally wanting to do or your organization has been wanting to do, now is the time to start prepping. Okay, let's talk about some local activities. So these are folks who are in Southern Ontario, you live in Brantford, Brant County, Hamilton, Haldimand, Norfolk, and you want to get involved with our organization. We have a couple of things coming up that I want to put on your radar. So we are participating in the Brantford Santa Claus Parade. November 30th, we are having another parade float. Last year, we had a really fun 50-foot parade float. One of our volunteers, Ken, built a massive greenhouse on the float. I made a bunch of vegetable costumes. They were like sandwich board costumes. It was so much fun. The float definitely was DIY, but it was so cute, and we really had a blast doing it together. So we're going to be doing it again this year. If you want to participate, our parade committee is going to be meeting on October 20th in the evening virtually, and you can get that link from me by emailing grow@egcgbrant.ca, or you can take a peek at our show notes page for the podcast and click the Contact Us button, and that would be the communitygardenpodcast.ca. So Santa Claus Parade, come join us. You get to dictate how much time you can give. You do not need to have any experience. Next thing, so this is very exciting. A couple of years ago, we hosted an Earth Day Community Garden Building Festival. Nope, Earth Day Community Building Festival, and we're going to be kind of re-envisioning that festival as a garden festival this year located at the Greenhouse and Learning Center. It'll be the grand opening. So that'll be happening in June of 2025. It's now all hands on deck to get this festival planned. So if you want to volunteer with us on the committee on the day of, whatever the case is, email grow@egcgbrant.ca or go to the show notes page. We're also looking for organizations who want to participate in an educational way or, have some sort of offering day of. So if you work in the horticulture, green space, environmental, gardening world, and you have something educational to offer or something of value to offer during the festival and you want to promote the organization or you want to participate, reach out, please. If you have ever thought about joining the board of directors for Eagle Ground Community Gardens, we will be having our annual general meeting in January. This is just something for you to start thinking about now. We're always recruiting for director positions as well as for committee lead positions. So I will update this when we have the final date, but our AGM's in January, and just start thinking maybe you want to get involved on the back end. We also are hosting a tree planting event at the new greenhouse site on November 2nd at 10 a.m. So you can come. Please ensure you are wearing closed-toed shoes, although it's a little too cold to be wearing sandals anyways, and consider bringing a shovel and some drinking water. We're going to be planting a permaculture orchard. This will give you a good opportunity to see the greenhouse, to see the park before maybe other folks have been able to. Also, Belonging Brant, we mentioned this in episode 8 with Armanda Lambert. Belonging Brant is hosting the ABCD Symposium for 2025 in May, and we are currently planning for the symposium. We're looking for community members to come join our committee. So if this is something that interests you, you want to learn more about ABCD, asset-based community development, shoot me a message. And finally, for my organizations that are listening, I have a couple of recommendations for you. If you haven't gotten to it yet, episode 9 with Roger Doran is about seed money. It's a fundraising platform for community gardens. It is a global platform. Please check out that episode and register for a seed money campaign. Your registration has to be in by November 12th, and then the campaign for anyone listening runs from November 15th to December 15th. And look into all the campaigns that are running and please consider donating. There is an Ontario Agriculture Infrastructure Grant due October 31st. If you've ever thought about building a greenhouse with your community garden organization, this may be a grant opportunity for you. And if you just Google Ontario Agriculture Infrastructure, it should come up. It's due by October 31st. There's also a grant right now through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. It's their Grow Grant. It's due by November 4th. And this allows various organizations to sustain their operations. It has nothing to do with gardening, but if you have been looking for an operations or a programming grant, this may be the grant for you. So I just wanted to share some of these pieces with you. I apologize, this is a little bit longer than normal. It's because I love to talk. Yeah, we're at 8 minutes. So I'm going to let you go. We're going to get into the episode now. I hope you enjoy it. As always, you can always reach out to us at podcast@egcgbrant. You can reach out to us through the show notes page at the communitygardenpodcast.ca. Email me, message me, send us a message on social media. I'm always happy to answer questions and help you out. Okay, let's get started.
Hey gardener, you're listening to the Community Garden Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor. In this space, we'll dig into the dirt with local gardeners of all skill levels to share tips, tricks, and stories from our gardening adventures. Let's get growing. Hey gardeners, we're here for another episode of the Community Garden Podcast. Today we're chatting with Cheryl Claridge. Cheryl lives in Brant County, so she's outside of city limits, and she is a gardener who offers garden plot rentals on her property. It's a very nice way of bringing gardeners together in a rural setting. Cheryl grew up in the farming community. Her parents and her grandparents grew flowers, feed, and they also tended to a large variety of livestock. And during this interview, Cheryl and I chat about community garden models, how a private plot system can work. We also chat about hornworms, and if you're a newbie gardener that grows tomatoes, you're really going to want to tune in for that. We also chat about aphids, which many of you listening are probably groaning right now. We talk about the frustrations of cleaning our hands after garden work. We also chat about intro to growing zinnias, which are a beautiful, vibrant cut flower that comes in a variety of different shapes and textures. We also chat about ways to use kale, and I complain about another vegetable that I just don't like. We chat about solo versus group gardening and our preferences. And then I also just speak to my preference of barefoot gardening. So you're going to want to tune in this week. This is a pretty laid back episode. Cheryl also identifies as a beginner intermediate gardener, so I'm sure everyone will have an opportunity to learn something. Let's dig in.
Hello, Cheryl. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Oh, we're out here on your property. It has just rained, which is really nice because I actually have to go to a community garden after this and go and start watering or weeding. I'm not going to water now. We got to go and weed with a bunch of volunteers. So I'm really excited to be able to maybe pull them out a little easier.
Yes, definitely makes a difference.
So, thanks again for being here today. We're really excited to hear about the history of what's happening here on this property.
First of all, thank you for coming here today. I appreciate getting the community involved in local gardens.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're here for. So I think that, what we're going to be chatting about today and what you have here going on at your farm is going to be really beneficial to the folks who are listening. So yeah, if you want to dive right in, introduce yourself and maybe talk about, like where you come from, how did you find gardening? When did it start?
Sure. So my name is Cheryl Claridge. I was born and raised here in the Brant County in the farming community. My dad farmed with his father, my grandfather, everything from cows, pigs, sheep, chickens, an apple orchard, flower and gladiola gardens, your typical hay, straw, corn crops, as well as pumpkin and squash patch. We all loved to help with the chores around the farm, but I took an interest in helping my grandmother and grandfather in the flower gardens. We harvested mainly zinnias and gladiolas and would arrange and bundle them to take to the market Saturday mornings. And as I grew into a teenager, I've kind of lost touch with helping out every weekend. Met a boy, got married, and moved to the city of Brantford. Fast forwarding, in 1993, we severed 20 acres from my parents' farm and built a house for our family to grow up in the country. And being back in the country with my own kids, the love of being outside in nature and gardening became close to my heart again. It was in 2020 when COVID hit, with the loss of available fresh vegetables in our grocery stores and the isolation from our communities, that the idea came to me. I had the land, the space, and I could bring the community together safely and have access to fresh produce. Thus, the Farmer's Daughter 2021 was born.
Amazing. So that's what you're here doing in this space now, right?
Correct.
Do you want to explain a little bit about what's happening here and how you operate?
So I do a little bit of social media. Most of it is word of mouth to let people know that we have 20 by 20 lots available, that they can rent the space out and design their garden any way that they would like. They can do flowers, they can do vegetables, they can do fruit, but whatever they choose to do.
That's amazing. And what was the response like from the community?
The first year was amazing. I think the fact that people were feeling divided and not able to be out interacting with nature as much, maybe, and with people, that I had 6 plots rented right off the bat. Yeah. Yeah. So I was very, very pleased with that. And we just had just so much fun as a community, being like-minded, coming together and sharing tips and tricks about the little gardening areas that we kind of had expertise in.
That's amazing. Did you find that most of the folks who were engaged and were being onboarded, were they gravitating towards flowers and ornamentals or vegetables?
Mostly vegetables. It has progressed from there, and I do have one gardener that has been with me since 2021, and she's a diehard gardener. She rents 2 plots. She lives in the city, and she's got all 3 elements incorporated into hers. She has fruits, vegetables, and flowers.
That's amazing. That's how I kind of garden at home. My garden is probably about 20 by 40. And like, of course, I do have vegetables and things like that, but I also will mix in a lot of cut flowers, any non-poisonous varieties in with the vegetables, both for aesthetics. And then also I do cut a lot of them to make bouquets and things like that. And I notice a big difference just with the vibe of the garden and the success of the garden. So I'm a huge supporter of kind of mixing in flowers in with the actual vegetables themselves. So I think that's really cool. Do you still just have 6 gardeners here, or have you expanded since?
The first year, as I say, was the largest. It's actually gone down a little bit. I had 2 people that did not make it this year that had planned on making it. So right now I have 3 gardeners.
Nice, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And do they visit on a schedule? Are they allowed to come and go as they please? Do you guys do any group, like, do you work on the gardens as a group, or does everyone just kind of come and work on their own?
So what we just ask of everyone is if they can just give us a heads up when they'll be out. And sometimes I'll try to be out there. And for myself and how I garden, sometimes I like just the serenity of being alone. And other times I like to, talk with the community. So I will go out and kind of feel the vibe, if you would say, and yeah, go from there.
Nice. Yeah, I do feel that. I'm usually a sole gardener. When I'm in my own garden space, nobody talk to me. If you're talking, you're helping. But then when I go to the community gardens to actually do my job, that's when I'm focused on engaging people. But then I notice sometimes when folks are coming into the community garden, even in a group setting, sometimes they're just interested in doing it quietly on their own too. So same idea, kind of got to gauge the vibe and see how people are feeling if they're very talkative. And then other times people are coming to socialize, right?
Right.
So I have to prepare for both opportunities.
hmm
But no, I definitely can appreciate the quiet gardening. So if folks were interested, I don't know if it's like if you have a specific registration time frame, if you were ever going to consider opening up to, I know you mentioned you only have 3 right now. Anyone listening was interested in potentially renting a plot with you, what would that process look like, and how would they actually get a hold of you?
I do have on Instagram, The Farmer's Daughter 2020, or they could reach me through Facebook, Cheryl Claridge. And I basically am engaged all year round. I'm open and willing to anyone reaching out. I normally have the garden season from late April into about the second weekend in November for cleanup. But, if somebody's anxious to get their spot, I can talk to them right after this season and get it saved for them. We have the potential of doing probably about 24 plots out there.
That's amazing. I know it's a pretty big space. When I was driving
Yes.
past, I was like, whoa, this is incredible. So, for folks who are listening, I'm going to toss Cheryl's information into the show notes. You can go to the show notes to take a peek, a little bit of information about the episode, and as well on how to get a hold of Cheryl if you were interested, or maybe just to follow along on Instagram, right? So, do you garden? I'm assuming you garden yourself as well outside.
Yes.
So, with your personal gardening experience, what are you currently growing? What are some practices that you follow in your garden?
So currently I'm growing tomatoes, onions, a few varieties of peppers, kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and I did start with spinach, but it did not.
I have a hard time with spinach too. I don't know if it's the heat or like they're not getting enough moisture. Maybe it's because
Yeah.
I saved the seed. I don't know, but I didn't have luck with spinach this year either, which is odd because it's supposed to be very
If
beginner friendly, but
right.
you just never know what's coming through and digging those seeds up, right?
Yes, and I think that's what's happened.
And you said you had grown up doing a lot of flowers. Do you do any flowers here as well?
So I My goal is to do a flower garden. Right now, I've planted some just from seeds, some zinnias and some straw flowers and some sunflowers. A lot of my zinnias don't appear that they've come up.
Oh.
And same thing with the sunflowers. So I'm going to do a reseed of that and just kind of see where we're at. But that is something that I'm definitely in the future looking to get into.
So do you usually direct seed your zinnias?
That's how I have been doing the zinnias. Yeah.
Cool. I haven't, I guess when I think about it, a lot of my mixes have zinnias in them, but usually when I do zinnias, I start them from seed. And this year they actually flowered too early and I had to go and lop all their heads off quickly. Like they
Aw,
honestly probably started flower. I grew them from seed inside and they honestly started putting on heads while they were still inside. I got them into the garden pretty late, probably like the first week of June.
mhm.
And almost right away they were, starting to flower and they were still only, I don't know, 4 inches tall. And I was like, no, 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 not yet. So to go and kind of top them all. But I love zinnias. They're so beautiful. This year I'm doing, last year I just did a singular variety, just a general mix. This year I'm doing candy cane and salmon, like just a bunch of different textures and colors. And I'm noticing a lot of them also have a lot of colors, multiple colors in their petals, not just solid colors,
Beautiful,
which I had never
beautiful.
done before. So yeah, zinnias this year have been a lot of fun.
Nice.
With the background you had and the experience you had as a kid, do you find any of those gardening practices have come with you into adulthood as you've been gardening here at home?
I think just definitely the love of it. Definitely that has come to me. And I think just the passion and the hard work for sure. I don't know that I really had any specific models that I follow. I'm very just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. That's how I garden too. That's how a lot of our community gardeners do it too, especially when they're working as a group setting. Have you experienced any garden hurdles here in this space, like when you're personally gardening?
Last year we had a big batch of aphids and hornworms.
Oh no, not the hornworms.
Yes.
I've only had experience with the hornworms. I think it was last year. I saw 2 of them and I pulled those suckers off
Yeah.
immediately. And then I went out that night with a light and went to search for them and I couldn't find a single one and I never saw them again. So I don't know if
Wow.
I got really lucky with finding the 2. It was
Yes.
broad daylight when I found them. For folks who are listening, hornworms are these massive, chunky caterpillar looking, usually green
Green.
worms, and they have a little horn. It's on the end of them, right? Yeah, on the
Mhm.
back of them, this little white horn. Honestly, they look like a character from Monsters Inc. And they will come and they will decimate your tomato plant overnight, foliage, everything. And if you don't find them quickly, you're gonna have a problem. And they're also really, really, really hard to find because they blend in with the foliage so well. So you can go
Yes.
out, try and look for them at night. That's when you'll be able to see them best with a light, or you can go and actually take a UV light. I haven't done this personally, but you can go take a UV light and they'll actually light up a little bit. So if you've had hornworms, you know exactly what we're talking about, and we're praying for your tomatoes. And we hope everyone listening never gets
It's horror.
hornworms. But once they start, it's really, really difficult to get them to stop. So yeah, they're sneaky. Do you have
Mhm.
any tips or tricks for hornworms?
What we did was basically the same. We would go out at night with the flashlight, and you could see them better because, as you say, they blend with the leaves very well. And we would have soapy water,
Mhm.
and we would just put them in the soapy water and
Called them, yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
And then aphids are every gardener's nightmare. I also have hundreds of tropical plants, so I have to be careful of aphids inside too. What were they eating for you, and what is your personal method of dealing with aphids in the garden?
They were bad on my tomato plants mostly. They did start a little bit on my peppers, but the tomato plants were the worst. And I find if I can get a spray bottle full of water and a little bit of dish detergent and just spray it on, it seems to take care of most of them.
Yeah, that's what I do. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of rosemary oil into the mix as well. in the past have looked at very, very expensive organic aphid killer or like a pest solution, and it literally had 3 ingredients: a surfactant, water, and rosemary oil. So sometimes I'll toss some rosemary oil in there, and I feel like I'm, evading those expensive products. But yeah, aphids are such a pain in the butt. Haven't had them in my garden for a couple of years. We use really heavy mulch layers, so we don't really have a big issue with pests. But in the community garden, especially at Earl Hague, last year it was so bad. And we were growing kale, like we had let all of our kale go to seed, and we were collecting the seed. And I was collecting seeds, I was just finding entire plants engulfed. Like, do I need to light these on fire? Like, it was crazy. And in the community garden setting, we don't really have as much time or as much availability to go in, and we can't use any like pesticides or anything like that. So we
Right.
need to stick to natural solutions. So for the most part in the community gardens, if we see it, we snap it off, we throw it over the fence, like away from the garden. But yeah, aphids are a big issue. And when I experience them in my personal garden, same idea. Little bit of water, a little bit of soap, and just go to town. And, that should help. I've heard like with brassicas, this is very funny to think about, but people will take nylon tights when their plants are still small, and they'll put it over top of the plant so that the light can still get to the plant. And as the plant grows, it's surrounded by this nylon, and the aphids, I guess, can't get to them. So I've seen that as a successful method of evading aphids, but other than pesticides, your options are a little bit limited.
Yes.
Do any of your tenants or any of your gardeners here, do they experience anything, you know, that you know of?
One of the gardeners, it's funny, just the other day, one of the gardeners said to me, I think you had a deer in here. And I said, why do you think that? She said, well, it looked like there was a hoof print in there. So that's been the first.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, she laughed about it. She thought it was hilarious. She didn't, she's as much for nature and animals as we all are, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did she notice any damage to any of the plants, or the only reason she knew is because of the hoof print?
She saw the hoof print, and I think it looked like a little bit of her kale had been chewed off.
Oh, yeah. They like the greens, right?
Yes.
But I mean, nobody likes kale anyways. So.
I love kale.
I'm so glad to hear that. I've tried so hard, and I love growing it, but I can't make it happen. I've tried preparing it every way imaginable. For everyone who's going to send me a message being like, you need to make kale chips. I don't like them. I just don't. Okay, hold on. Let me backtrack a little bit. Kale at the beginning of their second season, after they've gone through the winter, I can tolerate that a little bit more. The bitterness isn't there. They're a bit more tender, a little bit sweeter. I'll eat kale then, but that's about
Yes.
it. So, of course, you've grown up doing a lot of gardening. Were your children involved in gardening at all? Yeah, you mentioned you had children,
I have
right?
2
Yeah,
children.
Yeah.
They would kind of run through the gardens. They didn't seem to catch on to it like I did. Although, that being said, my daughter-in-law loves to garden, and my granddaughter loves to garden.
Oh, perfect. So it did continue in its own way,
Yes.
right? And do they come join you quite often here?
Not so much this year because there's a new grandbaby. So,
Ooh.
yes, so she's busy with her. But the last few years, yes, my little granddaughter has planted the seeds, the plants, pulled the weeds, watered.
Ugh, how
Yes.
old?
4.
Oh, 4. Perfect age for gardening.
Yes.
Last year we ran a little gardeners program at Earl Hague, and we would invite families to come. And those little ones, they love to water. Water is
That's
all
right.
they seem to care about. Water and seeds. And then, of course, when we did vegetable taste tests, they love that too.
Yes.
So that's amazing. A lot of fun. You've been gardening for a really long time and in a lot of really special settings. All right. So I have a couple of rapid fire questions, and I put quotations around that because they typically lead to really fun conversations. So I'd love to dive in and learn a little bit more about your preferences. So is there anything about gardening that you do not like?
I think, if anything, trying to get my hands cleaned after.
Oh, it's the worst.
Yes.
Oh, it's the worst.
Getting the dirt out from under the nails and into the cracks of your hands.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what gloves you're wearing.
Correct.
It simply doesn't matter. Another thing that I really find is, especially when I'm wearing gloves, everybody have mentioned this too. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. My nails will start to hurt because I keep my nails a little bit longer, and they'll start to hurt if I've dug into anything or if I've, had soil in my hands. Does that ever happen to you? Do your nails ever hurt?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. And nobody knows what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I'm like, you are not getting dirty enough. You are not gardening hard enough. Yeah, I feel your pain with the getting the hands clean enough. I actually have a wedding this weekend, and this whole week I knew I have to go garden tonight and I need to get my nails done, and I've been trying to schedule it around when I'm going to be in the garden, because I know whatever manicure I get is going to be absolutely ruined this year. And I know I am barefoot, but I have been managing it well. I've actually been barefoot gardening almost exclusively. You think it's hard to get your hands clean?
Yes. Okay. So my feet do get dirty in my rubber boots.
Yeah.
And I would love, 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 love to do some barefoot gardening just for the earthing of it.
Just take your shoes off.
And yeah.
Yeah, you just got to commit.
Yeah.
I've had to avoid it all week because, again, you think your hands are hard to clean. It's really hard with the feet.
Yes.
And the shoes that I'm wearing are strappy, and I'm in the bridal party. So, like, gonna see my feet. So I've had to put shoes on all week. Ugh, good grief. Another thing is when you're wearing socks and boots, and then you have like dirt all down your legs right up to your socks. You're like, ooh. Then you can start getting tan lines.
That's right.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's getting your hands clean is quite hard. I guess there's probably one point in the season where you're like, nah,
Yes.
I don't care.
That's right.
It's over
It's
now,
all
right?
worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any garden goals for the season this year?
I'm hoping that the tomatoes, I love making salsa, and we did 5 batches last year, and we're almost to the end of it. So I'm hoping that maybe I can do 6 or 7 this
Oh,
year.
yeah. And what does a batch for you look like?
It's about 5 jars. 5 jars.
And are those full liters or half liters?
Full.
Amazing. I know I love salsa too. 2 years ago, I love to can. I love to preserve. I'll even dabble in a little bit of pressure canning, even though it freaks me right out. I did crushed tomatoes to last us through the whole winter. We go through a lot of tomatoes. My partner loves them. And we finished them up by the time tomatoes were coming into season last year, which was amazing. But I simply did not have time to can more crushed tomatoes. And so that would have been, I don't know, August, September, October. We're now in June, and every day I have regretted not canning the tomatoes. And I'm so looking forward to this season, making sure that I schedule out a lot of time to do the year's worth again.
Hey, this is September Taylor here to update you on my canning adventures. So during this interview, I mentioned that I was going to ensure that I scheduled time to can the crushed tomatoes, and I did. So about a week, so the end of August, I blocked off an entire day. I purchased 150 pounds of Roma tomatoes from a farm in Norfolk. I'll put them in the show notes. And I spent 15 hours canning tomatoes. Now, mind you, I would say at least 4 of those hours is like just waiting for the processing, the actual canning to happen. So every 40 minutes or so is when an action's needed. So I was able to do other things, but it took me about 15 hours. And that doesn't include the full cleanup and the full storage process, because after 24 hours, that's when you go in, you remove your rings, you clean the jars, you make sure they're sealed. And I ended up having a lot that didn't seal properly. No, not a lot. Ended up being a lot of volume, but only a few jars. And so I took those, and the next day I processed that into a massive batch of pasta sauce that went into the freezer. So I canned the tomatoes. I'm so happy. Okay.
Yeah, once you kind of get onto that preserving kick, and you're able to actually enjoy some of that harvest throughout the winter, it makes a really big difference in the kitchen, right? So maybe you'll be willing to share your salsa recipe with us.
Sure.
I'll send you a message after, and we'll pop it in the show notes.
Okay.
Do you preserve anything else?
I did red pepper jelly. I do the kale and the Brussels sprouts and freeze those. And same as peppers, if I have extra peppers, I will also blanch those, throw those in the freezer. But as far as preserving, that's just those 2 are about the basics.
Amazing. I love it. And it's a lot of work.
It is.
It's not a quick and easy task. It's a lot of prep work. It's a lot of making sure you have all of your ducks in a row, kind of carve out some time out of your day to make sure you can actually do it. People forget sometimes that there's, you got to make sure the produce is nice and clean. got to process the produce, got to make sure the kitchen is spotless, right? And you got to actually can everything, and they got to wait 24 hours before I can put everything away. It's, yeah, a very long process. What is your favorite vegetable to grow?
I would say probably kale, because it seems like you pick a leaf and within a couple days there's another one there.
Yeah, it just keeps coming. It never
Yeah.
ends. I know I am
Yeah.
always like, oh, kale, it's so abundant. It's so beautiful. I love growing
Mhm.
it. I don't like eating it. So then oh, there's just too much kale. There's too much kale in the garden. There's way too much. We grow a lot of it at Earl Hag, and it goes pretty quick, but it's available all year round. Like there'll be kale in February that you can go harvest. So again, just a really abundant crop.
Yes.
Yeah. What's your favorite vegetable to eat?
I would say again, kale.
Uh-huh.
I've found that if I saute it with a little bit of oil and garlic,
Yeah.
love it.
That's amazing. I
Yeah,
love that. Maybe I'll
yeah.
have to saute it. Do you have any other ways that you will prepare it?
Put it into a fresh salad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Eat
just
it
as
on
a
a
Canadian.
sandwich.
Oh, I haven't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
I think when people think of kale, they just immediately think of either salads or into smoothies because that's where everyone thinks kale
Mhm.
belongs. So
Right.
maybe I got to get a little bit more creative and try again this year. I'm growing black magic kale. It's a really dark color, really, the leaves aren't very textured like traditional kale. So I really liked the look of it.
Right.
So it almost looks like dino kale, just a little bit darker. So maybe I'll have to give it a try again when that comes up.
Okay, fun fact. No black magic kale grew. We had planted it just before we had this interview, which was the middle of June. It's now the beginning of September, and I can confirm that no kale has grown. I suspect that when it was planted, it was about the time when we ease off on watering, and we likely didn't water it enough, and it just didn't sprout. So we're going to try again next year, definitely. And if you're listening to this and you're in the Brantford or Brant County area, stick around to the end to hear about how you can contact us, and we'll get you some black magic kale seeds.
What's a vegetable you don't like?
I'd say eggplant.
Yeah, I don't like eggplant
Yeah.
either. It's too mushy for me.
Too mushy. Yes.
I haven't found a way that I like. Actually, that's a lie. I really like, I don't know how to pronounce this. My family always pronounces it baba ganoush, but I'm pretty sure it's pronounced baba ganoush. The eggplant dip, Mediterranean eggplant dip. It's very delicious. I think that's the only way I'll eat eggplant. I used to work in an Italian bakery, and they also did a lot of hot foods and things like that. So they'd make eggplant parm all the time. Oof, I did not like it. Is there anything that you're currently struggling with in your garden this year?
I don't think so. I think everything seems to be, except for what I mentioned earlier about the spinach not coming up, everything else seems to be doing okay.
Nice. Any pests this year? Are you struggling with earwigs this year?
No,
No.
no.
What?
Haven't seen any. No.
It's been so bad this year. I've never seen earwigs like this in my entire life. And a couple of years ago, we had a really bad year, and I thought, this is crazy. This year, like 2024, absolutely tops it. And
Wow.
everyone I've talked to, they're just being overrun with earwigs. Not even just in their gardens, like everywhere. It's been so bad. Interesting. Curious. Anything that you have been faced with this year so far for pests?
No, actually, touch wood. Very lucky. Very lucky.
Just your little deer visitor, maybe.
Yes, that's right.
Well, you know what? I'm very glad to hear that. It sounds your space is off to a really great start, and it's still so early in the season, right? So much opportunity, and I want to say room for growth, but like Was there anything that you would like to add, whether it's about your gardening experiences, the farmer's daughter, anything that you can think of? Any questions for, related to Equal Ground or the organization?
I don't know how I would work it in. We haven't done it actually we did. I did do it last year. The first year when we were all together in the garden, there were 6 of us. We, as a group, donated to the food bank. And then we haven't done it as a group just because I guess it just never seemed to happen. But I would just do whatever extra I had, we would drop off at the food bank.
That's amazing. I love that. Obviously, that's something that Equal Ground does a lot. We do a lot of donating of produce to local pantries or to the food bank. So we really love to hear that. I think that's super cool. And if there's anything we can do to support you guys and support your efforts, you're always more than welcome to reach out.
I want to briefly chat about food donations from your gardens. Oftentimes, us gardeners are overproducing, or we're overproducing on a singular crop. And I often hear people say, I have too many zucchinis, I have too many tomatoes, and not everybody has the time or the ability to preserve food. Now, when you're finding yourself with an abundance of produce and not an immediate solution, I highly recommend that you consider your local food banks or pantries. Now, this is going to entirely depend on where you're located. Do a quick Google search for your town and look up local pantries, food banks, local food resources, and consider donating. Now, when we are donating, we also want to ensure that we're not burdening the organization with an excess of work. When you're taking in baskets and baskets and baskets of cherry tomatoes, that isn't going to be the most productive use of their time. So consider pre-bagging the produce that you're bringing in when they're loose items. So things like lettuces, you can pre-bag that. Any type of greens, you can pre-bag that. Cherry tomatoes, you can pre-bag. Sometimes people will take in ground cherries as well. Pre-bag those. Green beans, same idea. At the community garden, what I usually do is the kale and the larger greens, I'll essentially make a bouquet, and then I'll tie an elastic on the end of them, and that kind of pre-portions them. So please consider donating to your local food resources. Oftentimes they're struggling to reach fresh food, and they're relying on a lot of processed food. And then also ensure that when you are bringing these food items in, just take account of what you're bringing and maybe how you can decrease the load on typically what are volunteers.
Awesome.
So for folks who are listening, I'm going to put information about how to contact Cheryl and about the Farmer's Daughter 2021 into the show notes. So you can go take a peek. There might also be a salsa recipe there. And yeah, you can reach out to Cheryl directly if you have any questions about the Farmer's Daughter 2021. Thanks so much, Cheryl. I'm so grateful that you were able to join us.
Thank you, Taylor.
Cheryl, thank you so much for sitting down with me. It was really amazing to see Cheryl's garden and hear about how she's bringing gardeners together in rural settings. So at the end of every episode, I want to leave you with some gardening wisdom. And while I know that gardening is trial and error and there's a million ways to grow and a million factors that can affect your garden, I want to provide some advice that might help you save some time. So this one is less of a critique, and many of you probably know what I'm about to say, but this can be life-changing for some people. So if you are regularly watering your garden, and again, I'll mention this in every single episode, I love mulch, I use mulch, I don't really need to garden I don't really need to water because of mulch, but if it's the beginning of the season or you're going through a drought or you need to be regularly watering your garden, ensure that you are watering either early morning or at night. Now, the ideal time, ironically, is 4, 5, 6 o'clock, and that allows the soil and the plants to dry off and absorb that liquid before the sun starts to rise. Once the sun starts getting higher in the sky, the water on the foliage could damage the plants. It'll dry out the soil a little bit quicker. So you want to make sure you're watering early enough where the plants can benefit from the water before the sun hits it. And then the alternative is to water before bed, after the sun goes down. So anytime after 7 or 8 o'clock. This works. The evening watering is my preference, but it can come a little bit iffy or sketchy in the colder season. So right now it's early September when I'm recording this, and I don't know if I would want to water at night because I don't really want that foliage sitting with all of that liquid overnight. You're going to start to have mildew issues. So my preference is definitely to water early morning. I'm not a morning person, so you're not going to catch me watering. So evening will be just fine. But for new gardeners, do not water at the height of the day. Don't water at noon. Don't water on a scalding hot day. For some reason, if you see your plants severely suffering, you can give them water. Just make sure you're watering at the base of the plant and do not get the foliage wet. And when you're watering, water really, 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 really well. Just a light mist isn't going to cut it. All right, I'll leave that with you today. I also want to leave you with another inspiring note. So our guest Cheryl actually reached out to me and said, hey, I forgot a couple of notes that I wanted to include. And I said, send them over. Let's see them. And I didn't look at them until now. And I was just so inspired by what was written. So this is from Cheryl, directly from Cheryl from her notes. I don't have a particular knowledge in gardening, but I am learning as I go, and it gives me a great sense of serenity. I love to bring like-minded people together as a community for a sustainable and healthy lifestyle, both physically and mentally. Each gardener brings new ideas and tips and tricks, and we all grow together. I think that last line, each gardener brings new ideas and tips and tricks, and we all grow together, is very reflective of what Equal Ground Community Gardens does. We aim to bring gardeners together. We aim to share knowledge. We aim to foster that sense of community. We aim to bridge a pathway for folks to adopt healthier lifestyles and to meet neighbors and to enjoy nature. So Cheryl, thank you for sending this over. It feels very special, very, very special. Thank you to the City of Brantford and the Brant Community Foundation for funding this podcast. Also, a big thank you to our board of directors for letting me run with this project. The Community Garden Podcast is administered by Equal Ground Community Gardens, and you can view this episode's show notes at thecommunitygardenpodcast.ca. That link will also take you to the main Equal Ground website where you can go in and navigate any of our program information, any of our events, and you can also contact us. Podcast production and editing by Matt Wilfred at Nuthatch Consulting, and you can get in touch with Matt at nuthatchconsulting@gmail.com. Our graphic design is done by Ben at All Day Breakfast. Thank you to our lovely podcast committee, Paulina, Charlene, and Kat, for all of your hard work. We wouldn't be here without you. Please consider following, subscribing, and reviewing on your podcast platform to help us reach more people. You can follow Equal Ground on Facebook at Equal Ground Community Gardens, and you can also join our Facebook support group at the same name. You can find us on Instagram at equal_ground, and you can learn more about our organization at the show notes link or at www.egcgbrant.ca. If you would like to be on this podcast as a guest, you can email podcast@egcgbrant.ca, or you can visit the show notes page at thecommunitygardenpodcast.ca. We're looking to chat with anyone who identifies as a gardener in any way, shape, or form. We want to chat with you about your specialties, about your tips and tricks, about your experiences, whether you're a solo gardener or you're a community gardener. And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us, friends. I'm so happy to just actually see this podcast roll out, and we'll see you next week.